She turned down a doctor, then a lawyer, then a billionaire's son. Everyone around her said she was the smartest woman they knew. What none of them could see was the trap she was building for herself, one rejection at a time. She had been walking, eyes open and chin high, directly into the most expensive mistake of her life. Her name was Clara, and at 27, she was the kind of woman a room noticed, not just because of the sharp cheekbones, or the warm caramel skin, or the smile she deployed like a weapon, but because of the way she carried herself, like someone who had already decided where she was going and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. She had a master's degree in marketing, a senior strategist title at one of Lagos's top firms. By every measurable standard, she had made it. But Clara had a philosophy, and it had been written in her bones long before she had the words for it. She was 15 the night she sat at the bottom of her family's staircase and listened to her parent fight about money again. Not the passionate, theatrical kind of fighting, but the tired, hollow kind that came from years of unpaid school fees and a leaking roof and the quiet shame of buying second-hand rice at the market when no one was looking. Her father worked a civil service job that paid in promises and arrears. Her mother worked everywhere else, and every night her mother cried. Clara watched and made a decision so deep it became part of her structure. The way steel is part of a bridge. She would never know that life, not the poverty of the wallet, and not the poverty of spirit that came with it. Love, in Clara's dictionary, was a beautiful lie that poor people told themselves to feel better about being broke. It did not pay for a house in Banana Island. It did not fly you to Dubai for a long weekend. It did not silence the aunties at family gatherings who measured a woman's worth by the car her husband drove. Clara was not interested in beautiful lies. She was interested in rivers of money. Not a pond, not a lake, a river. So when the suitors began arriving, and they arrived in numbers because Clara was exactly the kind of woman men wanted to impress, she became something of a legend, the woman who said no to everyone. Dr. Michael Okafor came first, a neurosurgeon at Luth, gentle, soft-spoken, with kind eyes and a 2-bedroom apartment in Ikeja, and a velvet ring box he had been carrying in his pocket for 2 weeks before he finally found the courage to sit across from her on a quiet cafe on a Tuesday afternoon. He was nervous, in the way of someone who knew the answer might be no, but had decided that asking was worth it anyway. He told her he knew he wasn't the most exciting man, but that he would take care of her, love her until his last breath. Clara looked at him the way a chess player looks at a piece that has been outmaneuvered, not unkindly, but with finality. She told him that Wonderful didn't buy a view of the Atlantic Ocean, that he made 700,000 naira a month, and after taxis and his car note and his hospital fees, what exactly was left for the life she intended to live? He started to say something about 5 years, about potential, about where he was going. She stood up. She left. He walked out of that cafe with the ring still in his pocket and the look of a man who had been told, very politely, that he simply did not qualify. She did not cry about it. She did not think about it again. Then came Adewale Benson, a senior partner in a law firm. He drove a Lexus, owned a house in Lekki Phase 1, and took her to restaurants where the menu had no prices. For 3 dates, things looked promising. Then he mentioned that he expected his future wife to step back from her career and manage the home. Clara laughed, a cold, brittle sound, and told him that his portfolio was mostly debt, that he was renting that house and not owning it, and that his ex-wife had left for reasons that had nothing to do with difficulty and everything to do with control. He paid the bill and never called again. Clara considered this a clean exit. Her mother called every night. Her church group whispered. Her extended family, the aunties who had once called her too proud, now called her something worse, foolish. Gracie Feanyi, who had spent her whole life dreaming that her daughter would land the kind of man who made suffering worth it, could not understand what was happening. Clara would answer the phone, listen to the latest version of the same concern, and say the same thing every time. She was not looking for a pond. She was not looking for a lake. She needed a river. Then came Chuka, and for a moment, even Clara felt something close to awe. Chuka was the son of a billionaire oil magnate. He was young, handsome in a way that looked expensive, and he flew his own private helicopter with the casual ease of someone who had never once had to think about the cost of anything. He wore designer sunglasses indoors. He spoke in the lazy, confident drawl of old money, not earned money, not hustled money, but the kind of wealth that had simply always existed in his orbit, so heavy and so constant that he had stopped noticing it, the way people who live near the sea stop hearing the waves. He courted her with a private jet to Accra for lunch. He sent a Porsche to her apartment on her birthday with a handwritten note. He promised her a mansion in Ikoyi and a vacation home in Cape Town. Clara told her mother, "This is it. This is the river." But Chuka had a temper. It started small enough to be explained away. A snide comment on her lipstick, a dismissive wave of the hand when she offered an opinion, a coldness that arrived without warning and left without apology. Then one night at a club in Victoria Island, he saw her laughing with an old university colleague, a man, and something in Chuka's face went very still. He crossed the room, took her by the arm, his fingers pressing into her flesh like he was marking territory, and hissed in her ear that she was a reflection of him and she needed to act like it. Later that night, in the hotel suite, he backhanded her for what he described as the way she had looked at the waiter. Clara packed her things the next morning with her cheeks still burning. She left. She told herself it was because he was a brute, full stop, non-negotiable. But there was a voice underneath that thought, quiet and cold and deeply ashamed of itself, that whispered something she would carry for a long time after. He was still the richest, if he had only been a little less violent. She did not stay, but she heard the voice, and she could not unhear it. It was at a business gala at the Echo Hotel, a room full of Lagos money, the kind of event where everyone was performing wealth for everyone else, that she first saw Alhaji Rashid Bello. She noticed him not because he was loud, but because he was still. In a room of people competing for attention, he simply stood at the bar and let the room come to him, which it did. People leaned in when he spoke. The governor's aide crossed the room to shake his hand with a slight bow. Waiters materialized at his elbow without being summoned. He wore a cream and gold agbada of exquisite cut, simple enough to seem modest, expensive enough to say everything. The watch on his wrist was a Patek Philippe, not the kind of watch that announces itself, but the kind that whispers to people who know how to listen. Clara maneuvered herself next to him at the bar. They traded 2 lines of sharp, pointed conversation. He told her she wasn't there to network, she was there to hunt. She smiled and asked if he had been caught. He laughed, a short barking sound that didn't reach his eyes, and said no, he was always the hunter. She heard the warning in those words and chose not to believe it. Rashid Bello was mysterious. Clara mistook it for depth. He was secretive about his business. He called it import and export, the movement of value, logistics, and she mistook it for discretion. He owned a fortress of a mansion in GRA, complete with a private gym, a cinema, and a swimming pool that glowed an unnatural blue at night. He took her to London for a weekend. He bought her a penthouse in her name. He gave her a black card with no limit. Her mother was skeptical. Her friends were jealous. Clara told everyone who questioned her that the richest men were never in the papers. They owned the papers. The wedding was the event of the season. Clara wore a gown dripping in crystals and pearls. The church was filled with orchids flowing in from Thailand. There were 11 bridesmaids, a live band from South Africa, and a cake that cost more than Dr. Michael Okafor's annual salary. As she walked down the aisle towards Rashid, she felt a wave of pure triumph. She had rejected the mediocre and been rewarded with the magnificent. This was the life she had promised herself at the bottom of that staircase. This was the river. She did not notice that his mother was not at the wedding. She did not notice that his business partners all had the same hollow eyes. She did not notice that the pastor stumbled over the word love as if it were a language he had never been taught to speak. The trouble began on the 10th day of the marriage. She was unpacking in the master bedroom when she found a key in a drawer beneath his socks. It was heavy and old, iron, the kind of key that looked like it belonged to a door that should not exist. It was not for a car or a safe. It looked almost ritualistic. That night at dinner, she asked about it, casually, strategically. Rashid's eyes flickered, just for a half second, just enough for her trained strategist's brain to catch, and then the mask was back, and he told her it was for his storage unit, family heirlooms, nothing interesting. He said nothing interesting with too much emphasis. Clara noted it and said nothing more. A week later, while he was in Cotonou on one of his business trips, she searched the house until she found a door she had never seen before. It was in the basement, behind a bookcase that slid aside on silent tracks when she pressed the right point on the wall. The door was solid teak reinforced with iron bands. Its key fitted perfectly. It opened on silent hinges, as if it had been maintained and waiting. She turned to leave. The bookshelf had closed behind her. There was no handle grok on the inside. And then she heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming down the basement stairs. Rashid stood in the doorway. His face was illuminated from below by the candlelight, and he looked like a different thing entirely. Not a man, but something wearing the shape of one. He told her he had hoped to wait a few more months, that her curiosity had always been what he admired most about her, and that it would now be her undoing. He did not hurt her that night. He sat her down in the living room with a glass of wine she did not touch, and explained everything with the calm detachment of someone walking through a business proposal. His business was not import and export. He had a patron, old, powerful, non-human. The patron gave him wealth, the Midas touch, influence that money alone could not buy. In return, Rashid gave the patron what it craved, the blood of the innocent. $1 million per life, clean, untraceable. The police commissioner was one of his clients, he told her. The most powerful men in the city moved through his world. There was nowhere to run that he couldn't reach. She asked why he had married her. He was worth over $200 million. He had not married her for money. He had married her, he said, and here his voice dropped to the quietest, most terrible register she had ever heard, for her womb. His patron required a very specific kind of sacrifice, a child conceived not in love, but in transaction, a child born of a union blessed by a church, but cursed by intent. She had rejected every good man because she wanted wealth. She had made herself, without knowing it, the perfect vessel. On the child's first birthday, it would be given to the patron, and in exchange, Rashid would become the richest man in West Africa. She ran. The guards stopped her. They were gentle about it, the way that something enormous and inevitable is always gentle. It doesn't need force because it has already won. For 3 months, she lived in the gilded cage he had always intended for her. She had Instagram, Netflix, room service. From the outside, she looked like a queen. From the inside, she was a woman with locked doors and monitored phone calls, and a husband who had explained very calmly exactly what she was for. She tried to bribe a guard with her wedding ring. He took the ring and told Rashid. She crossed sleeping pills into her pepper soup. He ate it, smiled, complimented the flavor, and reminded her that his patron protected him from all poisons. She locked herself in the bathroom and stopped eating. After 3 days, he broke the door down, held her still, and inserted a feeding tube. She would not die, he told her, not until she had served her purpose. By the 4th month, something shifted. Not the despair, that was still there, but underneath it, something cold and focused and entirely Clara began to move. She had spent her whole life calculating odds. She had been calculating the wrong ones. She stopped fighting. She smiled at Rashid. She laughed at his jokes. She asked him to teach her more, and he was delighted because arrogance always is. He began to believe she was broken. He became careless. The key appeared on the nightstand. The guard count reduced. He began to trust her the way powerful men always eventually trust the people they have conquered, completely and with fatal confidence. What he did not know was that Clara had found a crack, a food delivery app, a coded message embedded in the special instructions for a jollof rice order, extra pepper, check the basement of 14 GRA, Wednesday midnight, bring police you trust. The recipient was Yemi, an old colleague from her marketing days, now a journalist who had spent 2 years trying to build a case against elite ritualists in Lagos. Yemi understood exactly what the message meant. She had been looking for Rashid Bello for a long time. On the chosen Wednesday, Clara made him her favorite dinner, spicy pepper soup and pounded yam. She had spent 2 weeks concentrating 20 sleeping pills down to a few precise, odorless drops. His patron protected him from poisons, but sedatives were not poisons. They were simply sleep. He ate. He kissed her forehead. He started a sentence about oil futures, and his eyes rolled back and he folded across the dining table like a man who had simply decided to rest. She took the key. She went to the basement. She did not summon the entity. She was a strategist, not a fool. But she had spent weeks reading his grimoires, the books of shadow he kept in a locked steel box he had grown careless about hiding. She had found the binding ritual. She drew the circle. She lit the candles. She spoke the words backward because Rashid had once told her in a moment of drunken arrogance that reversing a binding chant stripped a servant of the patron's protection. She cut her own palm and let the blood fall on the altar. Then she spoke his full name and bound him to the altar until sunrise. And she did not know if it worked. She only knew that at that moment, upstairs, the front door burst open and she heard boots on the floor, heavy and authoritative, and the most beautiful sound she had ever heard in her life. Yemi had come through. The police found Rashid unconscious at the dining table. They found the basement. They found the jars, the altar, the ledger listing 57 names with dates and dollar amounts beside each one. They found 3 shallow graves in the backyard. Rashid Bello was arrested that night. His patron, real or imagined, did not intervene. He is currently awaiting trial in a maximum security facility where by all accounts he spends his nights screaming at the walls. Clara was taken to a hospital. She was 4 months pregnant. The baby was healthy. The doctors asked if she wanted to terminate, and Clara stared at the ultrasound image for a long time, at the tiny curled shape with a heartbeat that flickered like a candle flame, and thought about what this child was and was not. It had been conceived in transaction, yes, but it was also half hers, and she had spent her entire life running from her mother's poverty, rejecting every good man, building a philosophy on the belief that wealth was the only thing that could protect her. She had been wrong about all of it. This child was simply alive. She kept the baby. A girl. She named her Adaize, which means king's daughter. Not in honor of Rashid, but because Clara decided that this child would be her own kind of royalty, not of wealth, of character. She sold the penthouse. She returned the black card. She moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Surulere, the kind of neighborhood she had once looked at with contempt that she now understood to be fear in a tailored coat. Her mother came to visit, confused and quietly ashamed, holding her granddaughter and looking around at the simple rooms and asking what had happened to all of it. Clara looked out the window at the Lagos skyline, the same skyline she had once intended to own, and said she had nothing and also everything that mattered. She thought about Michael Okafor sometimes. She looked him up. He was now head of his department, married to a school teacher, father of twin boys, living in a house in Ikeja that was exactly what she had once sneered at. He looked happy in the way that could not be performed, the deep, unremarkable, sustaining happiness of a man who had built something real. She thought about Adewale, the lawyer who went bankrupt 2 years after she left. She thought about Chuka, who beat his next girlfriend so badly she lost sight in one eye and was now in a psychiatric facility. She thought about Rashid, the richest of all of them, the monster in the Agbada, screaming at his prison walls. 6 years after the night the police came through her door, Clara started a foundation for women who had been victims of ritualist marriages and coercive wealth traps in Lagos.
She spoke at churches and town halls and university auditoriums, not with shame, not with performance, but with a directness that came from having looked at the worst version of her own choices and survived them. She told her audience that she had turned down a doctor who would have loved her faithfully and a dozen other good men because their bank accounts didn't meet her standard. She told them she thought she was being smart. She told them with a steadiness that silenced every room that she had been a fool, not a wicked fool, but a frightened one, and fear in a beautiful dress is still fear. She never remarried. She found she didn't want to. But every Sunday, she and Adaeze visited a certain hospital in Ikeja, and a certain neurosurgeon always made time to come out to the lobby and say hello to the little girl who had taken to calling him Uncle Mike. Sometimes, when he smiled at Adaeze, Clara caught a glimpse of the life that road had led to. The quiet life, the simple life, the life where love was the thing and not the consolation prize. She did not grieve it. She had shed every last one of her tears in a basement that smelled of old blood and extinguished candles. Instead, she took her daughter's hand and walked back into the afternoon, not as a queen of gold, not as a cautionary tale, but as a woman who had paid an extraordinary price for an ordinary truth, that a man's bank account is not a measure of his soul, and that the most expensive things in life, safety, peace, love that asks nothing back, cannot be bought at any price. She had tried. She has the scars to prove it. And standing in the Lagos sun with her daughter's hand in hers, she understood finally and completely that this, just this, was enough.